one of the things that I said in that first counseling meeting that I'll never, that I realized I shouldn't have said was, I shouldn't feel this way. And I think for retirees today, if they're in that spot of retirement and it's harder than they thought, or they're not fulfilled and they're, whatever they're at, it's combined with other transitions, don't do that. Don't say, well, I shouldn't feel this way, because society is going to tell us that retirement's this joyful, great time.
Well, that was Ben Taatjes talking about his feelings as he was going through one of his life transitions. Hey everybody, Jared Sebesta here on behalf of Ben Taatjes and myself. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Well, we're going to get right to the podcast here. Retirement is a difficult transition for many people. It's sold as a time when life is at its best, which leaves many retirees feeling like there's something wrong. In this podcast, Ben Taatjes explained how it's okay to feel a little off when retired, and how retirees should never say this statement, I shouldn't feel this way. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back to the show. Jared Sebesta here. So glad that you're joining us on Retire Repurposed. I said this last week. If you are approaching retirement, if you are retired, whether you're newly retired or maybe been retired for a number of years, or speculating at the concept of retiring sometime in the near future, this show is for you. You're going to hear a little bit of everything on this show, but really when it comes to your life and how you tie your life into retirement. And a lot of the things that we say on the show is really trying to unlearn a lot of concepts that society has taught us about retirement. There is certainly a template that you are supposed to follow and supposed to feel when it comes to retirement, and this show and other shows are dedicated to kind of unlearning that and really helping you transition into retirement into the best season of your life, the most impactful season, the most purposeful season of your life. If that's what you're interested in, then you have certainly come to the right place. Again, on today's show, we're going to continue talking about life's transitions, and certainly retirement is one of those major transitions in life. And whenever you transition, lots of times you have to reset your perspective on certain things. You have to be aware of things. You have to be ready for certain things when it comes to this transition, whether you were ready for it or not, whether it was expected or unexpected. Retirement certainly falls under that category of an expected transition. It certainly just doesn't fall out of the sky. So it's one of those things that is a big deal, certainly, but it gives you plenty of time to prepare and be aware of certain things. So again, on today's show, that's what we're going to cover. Several episodes ago, we talked about resetting your table. Ben Taatjes talked about how he's dealing with his oldest daughter now leaving the home to head off to school on the other side of the country, and how he has to kind of reset his table, so to speak, metaphorically, relationally, and even physically in his home. Then we talked about resetting your expectations, how so many times there's strife in life, there's friction in relationships in our home because we don't have the right expectations, or we go into a transition with the wrong expectations. And then last week we talked about resetting your routine and how we need to be flexible. And Ben talked about a story how he went to a wedding a couple of weekends ago, and the weather did not cooperate, and how the bride and the groom had to be very flexible, and they did that. Ben Taatjes joins me on the show now, and again, we can't stress enough how I don't want to say stressful, but how lots of times transitions catch us off guard, and how tough they are to take many times, whether it's a rainy day on a wedding or a life change like retirement.
Yeah, I mean, we see it every day, Jared, in our line of work, and just the what should be this really, I guess, people think easy transition. I know, back to the wedding example, I know there's people that spend way more time planning just their wedding than they do their marriage, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the thing that we want to make sure clients don't do. Is that people have. I've heard clients say this. They said, I think we spent more time just planning a vacation than we did your retirement. And they've planned the financial side. They've looked at all the numbers. They made sure everything was ready except for the most important piece.
Right.
And that is, what am I going to do? How am I going to keep meaningful work? How am I going to impact others? How am I going to live with my spouse in this time? And we don't give it enough credit to just how much change it is. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes, as we're going to talk about in today's show, we start to see it. And they were like, well, it shouldn't be this way. It shouldn't. It should be a really happy time. And sometimes it's just not.
There are so many similarities to marriage. You talk about in your book, Repurpose the Untold Story of Retirement in America, about the showroom effect, how we put this thing up on a pedestal. And I love that wedding analogy, because I just celebrated my 17th wedding anniversary this week. You've been married 20 plus years. You got several years on me.
24, yeah.
24. But isn't it interesting how, like, again, as you're engaged and you're planning, there's, like, to your point, there's so much planning. But in your head, you can't imagine yourself, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road. It's kind of like when people buy a dog. My wife did this before we were married. She bought this little dog and was literally just thinking about the dog. I mean, she was dreaming about this little dog. And 17 years later, that dog was still with us. And it's so funny because you don't put yourself in that position, and you can't really imagine it. But again, to your point with retirement, man, it's like the retirement day is just the wedding day. Getting to the retirement Friday, the birthday party, the cake, that's just the event. you forget the 20, 30 years to come after that.
You just took that dog home, that little puppy, and now you're going to live with it for the next however many years. Yeah. I think that is true. We don't sometimes see the long-term effects of those decisions, and sometimes we're told that, oh yeah, you need a dog, to that analogy, that we need, it's going to be just all easy. And sometimes it's not, right? The challenges will come up, and that's when you got to realize, sometimes, as we're talking about today, you just need help with that.
You talked about last week about how important routine was, and how much stability that brings in. I think that's a really important point. Like, just discuss that for a moment. Like, when life gets out of control, sometimes we've got to really rely on the things that are stable, and we can engineer that into our lives as well.
Yeah, routines are important for two big reasons, right? For retiree, number one, because it kind of replaces the guardrails that gets us up in mornings, kind of that work gave us, right? The guide to our day, the structure, important for just keeping us, doing meaningful things. But the other thing is realizing that it's a big transition. It is stressful. It is when you're in a spot and you're in stressful times, not sticking to routine. I mean, you go and there's analogies all over the place for that. You look in combat, they look to stick to the routine, because when you get out of the routine, that's when mistakes happen. So again, with retirees, keeping a routine there in that stressful situation and that big life change is very, very important.
I think there is something to being flexible, like we've mentioned earlier. There is something to trying things new. In your book, you talk about walking backwards. You talk about trying to brush your teeth left-handed. It's not really what we're talking about here. Again, if we want to grow, lots of times we have to get ourselves out of routine. You're talking about that transition specifically, right?
I am, and yeah, I want people to try new things. That's very important, to not get complacent and just do what you did yesterday from a learning and expanding your horizon. But when it comes to like the day, what we're talking about is I don't want every day to look like Saturday or Friday or whatever, and lose track of days and lose track of time, right? And you want to keep those basic things in your life to give you those guardrails.
Yeah, exactly right. If you missed last week's show or the weeks prior, talking about resetting and helping you through life's transitions, go back and check that out. Again, we're on iTunes, we're on Spotify. Go back and use your favorite podcasting platform. Make sure you subscribe while you're there. So today we're continuing talking about this idea of transitions. And it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly how to title this show, but we're kind of going with how to reset how you think. And it's not really even resetting how you feel, but we are going to talk about certain feelings. Let's get this show started off with why that's important with the topic today.
Yeah, Jared, as we're talking the last couple of weeks, in the last several shows, it keeps coming up to me that I'm looking at the big transition I've had in my life over the years, and how I've struggled with them. Certainly my daughter getting ready for college, we've talked about that a lot. But then I go back to other major transitions, and it actually hit me when I was looking at that social readjustment rating scale, that Holmes-Ray life stress thing we talked about a couple shows ago, where there's a list of life events, and they're all given a certain score, a value as to how stressful they are, right? And you add them all up, and at the end of the day, you circle them, and then you get a score, and you say, okay, where am I at? Am I like on the brink of a major,
nervous breakdown,
yeah. or what's happening here?
Yeah.
And I remember very clearly about 3-4 years ago, kind of doing that in my head and getting to a point where I had enough things going on in my life that I couldn't get out of it myself. Jared, this is just, it's tough to mention, but I think it's important to talk about, is that sometimes it's okay to get some help with something like that. So, I mean, I keep seeing retirees that are hearing this, and they're like, I just don't know where to go. I'm to that point where this retirement was added on to a number of other life changes I'm in.
Sure.
And I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Go talk to somebody, because that's what it took for me.
Yeah.
I'll just admit, I saw a counselor, and I don't think, for a while I was all trying to hide that. I was like, oh man, I got help and I got a counselor. I would call him just a coach, and that's fine, but really it was a counselor, because I got in a point where I actually entered a place of depression a few years ago.
Yeah.
And it was based out of major life transitions I was going through. Business was changing. I looked down this list. I'm like, yep, major business readjustment, major change in financial state, either worse or better. Turns out mine was better. That was actually stressful. Changes in residence. We were moving. We were selling our house, moving to a house we were building.
You're building a house, which is
building
stressful.
House was stressful.
Yeah.
And there was enough stuff there that caused me to get to a point where I just wanted to not deal with it. Like I didn't want to make decisions in the house. I didn't want to make business decisions. I got to actually full blown, straight up like depression. To a point where it was bad. Yeah. Lost, like, I think, that's when my wife first told me. She's like, you're looking skinny. I go to the doctor, and he says, and this doctor's a good friend of mine. He says, Ben, how are you doing? I said, pretty good. He goes, you don't look good.
It's not good.
I got on the scale, and I was like almost 40 pounds lighter.
Yeah.
Not on purpose. Wasn't eating. All these things that my wife, who has been with me for, like I said, 24 years, said, we got to go talk to somebody. Started there, and then a counselor. And one of the things that I said in that first counseling meeting that I'll never that I realized I shouldn't have said was, I shouldn't feel this way. And I think for retirees today, if they're in that spot of retirement and it's harder than they thought, or they're not fulfilled, and they're whatever they're at, it's combined with other transitions.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Don't say, well, I shouldn't feel this way, because society is going to tell us that retirement's this joyful, great time. And for me, I mean, growing business and moving to a new house and all the other things, should be all this happy, great stuff. But yet I felt depressed. I was out. It was just, I wasn't right.
Yeah.
And I said to my counselor, I said, well, I just shouldn't feel this way. He said, Ben, stop right there. That's the first thing we got to address.
Okay. Let's unpack this just a little bit. You mentioned a lot there. You mentioned how everything in your life at that time was actually going really well. And I remember that time it was kind of coming out of, like we were kind of post-COVID era. And I think that those several years, like through COVID and coming out of COVID, was really stressful on a lot of people in many different ways, in many different capacities, for many different reasons. But you talked about the making decisions. I think people suffer from a lot of decision fatigue. I know I do. Sometimes, the first half of my day is so packed full of so many things. And then sometimes when I come home from work, I can handle it still coming home from work, but sometimes after like 7 o'clock, Daddy's kind of done making decisions. And I say that because I've got 4 kids, and they usually have requests. And then sometimes when my wife and I head off to bed and put the kids to bed, then all of a sudden it's time to talk and make decisions. And sometimes I'm just like, I just can't make any more decisions. Just talk about how stressful that is, not only for you, but also for people that you see, because there are a lot of big decisions that have to be made in retirement.
Huge decisions, Jared. And that's, for me, it might sound small, but being a very bad decision maker when it comes to, like just even simple things on, hey, we're designing an entire house, and then we had business decisions at the same time. We're making big decisions on the business. We're doing other things. It's growing, but with decision fatigue came stress, anxiety, and it eventually led to a place of depression. So I see this. I see this with retirees who are like, am I ready? And then they analyze, the different, pros and cons. And there's all these important reasons to make those lists. But at some point, you do. You get this paralysis by just analysis of too many things. And I see this in business owners that are, going through that transition, because I can't think of I mean, that's even a bigger transition, because now you got somebody that's potentially going to retire, kind of, right, from this business because they're leaving, but there's identity stuff there, right, with this is my business I created. There's financial considerations, all these other things. And I've walked with several. I'm walking with a few right now, that very successful people it is tough, right? So I think what I've recognized is you have to name it. You have to name it. Hey, this is stressful. Yeah. This is tough. I shouldn't feel this way. No, you do feel this way. Start by naming it. And I think that's been incredibly helpful for me. And Jared, I think some of the reason this is coming up now is, I was listening to a podcast. Now I'm reading a great book, which is actually titled, I Shouldn't Feel This Way.
How ironic.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Name what's hard, tame your guilt, and transform self-sabotage into brave action. Okay, that's the name of the book. Allison Cook, PhD, got in contact with this book from another podcast I listened to, and I can tell you that, again, we tend to, certainly as Christians and believers, and that's part of her book too. She talks about that. Like, I shouldn't feel this way. I'm a believer, and I'll just pray harder, and I'll just you almost feel this level of guilt for feeling down. I mean, like, we have all of these good things going on in our lives, but she's again saying sometimes that's not enough. Meaning, he's not saying that God's not all powerful and not big enough.
Yeah.
But we may need more than just the typical. Oh yeah, we're just going to pray a little harder for you, and you may actually need intervention and help.
No, I've heard it explained this way, where imagine you're driving a car, and anger gets in the car with you, or feeling depressed or overwhelmed, and I think that, I don't want to start a philosophical debate. I personally don't believe that being angry is a sin. I think it's an emotion and it's part of the human experience. Again, the Bible says don't sin in your anger. So it doesn't say don't be angry. It says don't sin in your anger. And there was times where the disciples were angry, maybe righteously or not. There were times that I think Jesus was angry, So I subscribe to the camp where I'm not, don't feel like those emotions are sinful, so to speak. So if you're driving a car and anger comes in, or depression, I think we don't give ourselves a lot of leeway, especially as Christians, like to your point, to say like, oh, I'm feeling this way. There's nothing wrong with those emotions being in the car. It's when those emotions take over the driver's seat, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's something that Allison Cook talks about in the book too. She's like, when you're all jumbled up and you're in the middle of all these emotions, and it's hard to find clarity and make good decisions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when the emotions are there, again, I don't, is it wrong for me to be anxious? I mean, yeah, the Bible says do not be anxious about anything. But the antidote, right, is where I'm putting my trust, and where I'm, where I'm finding, right, the anti-anxiety, which is in giving some of the control back to God. I mean, whenever I'm in that spot, Jared, I'm just taking a step down my counseling that I in my mind. It's like, okay, when I get anxious, I'm trying to be more of God. Like, I'm trying to control every single little thing and make everything right. And that gets me in a lot of trouble, right? So the anxiety comes out of a place of control, and you kind of go down that. And I think for retirees, business owners that are trying to like be to take control to the point that let God do what He's going to do, and they take that back. I think that's where some of that stems from. But I've seen it so many times, Jared, with retirees and people in transition, where they're not even comfortable telling me like how they like, man, this is hard.
Yeah,
it's just hard going through retirement, because again, society, everybody is like, oh, you're so lucky you get to be done, and other people are stuck at work, if you will, are staying there, right? And they
want to be you.
They want to be you because you're retiring, and at the end of the day, you're left a little bit, I guess, unfulfilled many times. I think there's that. We were talking about the other day about it was either Super Bowl winner or a champion of some kind who got to that point, right?
Yeah.
And it was like the worst day of his life.
Yeah.
I think you were telling me that.
Yeah, Steve Weatherford, you should follow him. He's on social media. He's a really, really interesting guy. He was voted most fit guy in the NFL. Strong Christian guy. But now he helps lead men, kind of helps them kind of shed old identities and stuff that hold men back. But yeah, he just did a post on Instagram, just talked about that, and it was a picture of him winning the Super Bowl with the Patriots and his wife and his kids, and he goes on to say how that was like the most depressing day of his life. You'd be hard pressed to get. I mean, I'm trying to put myself into his shoes. At that moment, again, you just won the Super Bowl, and 12 hours prior, you were holding the trophy with your team and had the world's eye. But if he was real with himself, he was actually feeling very unfulfilled, and probably felt the same way as many retirees and what you have felt, and what we've all felt to some extent, where it's like, why do I feel this way? I inherently know all that I have. I should be thankful, and kind of beat myself up over feeling that way.
Yeah, and I can almost guarantee you that at some point he was seeing a sports psychologist, he's seeing a counselor. I mean, there's a lot of people that helped him probably come to that realization.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of today's show. I want people to be okay with that.
Yeah.
I want people to be like, okay, I do need a little bit of help. Jared, I mean, a lot of people don't know this. One of the guys on our team here has his master's in psychology. Mm-hmm. He was doing marriage counseling prior to joining our team. And one of the things that I know he's been able to do is sit down with some clients going through this major life transition of retirement or selling a business. Mm-hmm. I can think of a story. This goes back, man, it must be almost 10 years ago, maybe eight years when he first started. I had a retiring farmer in our offices. We were talking about, all the financial pieces of the retirement and everything. And something just led me to ask him, I was like, how are you really doing, you as a person, with this transition? And he's a retiring farmer. Kids aren't in the farm, so he's now going to rent out his land, live on that and not be on the farm, and move a different state away. And his wife, kind of chimes in. She says, well, he's not doing very well, Ben. And this is a gruff farmer, not willing to talk about it, I thought. And he ends up saying, he opens up just a little and gave me the window. And I said, Mr. Client, would you be okay? Or would you take time to meet with this new guy on our team who actually could talk to you about some of the way you're feeling? And it's not, he goes, you mean like a counselor? I said, well, kind of, but just think of somebody you should talk to. Mm-hmm. And he said, yeah, I'll give it a try. Mm-hmm. And reality is his wife said, yeah, he'll give it a try. But he agreed to it. And he came in, and I know I was jumping another meeting, and I left the meeting. I said, he's still in there with Matt? And yeah, they sat and talked for over 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And his wife later told me it's one of the best things that he did in the entire transition, the best value he added. But again, that was okay for him to do. Yep. And I think people need to hear, when you start saying, I shouldn't feel this way, you do feel the way you feel. If you can't get out of that spot yourself, somebody else who's trained to do that can get you out of there, can help you see it. And sometimes it's just speaking it and having the awareness, right, that I am feeling this way, and getting some help with it.
You talked about how you have to kind of give yourself a lot of grace, and basically that's what you were allowing this farmer to do, was to talk it out and probably be a little easier on himself than what he gave himself credit for. We do that in the Christian camp as well. You mentioned being aware, and I think that's really important. We've got about 2 minutes left. What are some other things people can do to kind of help through this transition?
Well, I think for me, it was like naming and being able to change thought patterns. Man, I can get down the rabbit trail pretty quick of getting into my headspace where I know where I'm going eventually is around circles where you end up at the same place, and it's not healthy. So again, seeing that thought pattern, and for some people in retirement, that's easy to do. The thought pattern is, I'm not that important right now. My company doesn't rely on me. My family, I'm no longer, my kids aren't at home. Maybe you were a stay-at-home parent. Well, they don't need me now as much as they did. Maybe you ran a successful big company. My team doesn't need me. And you get in this thought pattern as, I'm not enough, or I don't matter. And that's a dangerous thing. So to be able to recognize that your value, your identity, why you're important is way beyond what you did. That's just what you did. It's not who you are, right? And I think embracing, God created you for certain purpose. And that ultimate purpose is not your career. It isn't your job. He created you, right, for that purpose. I think we got to find that, right? In retirement, I think we got to realize that purpose doesn't start or end with retirement, right? That's just a life change.
No.
It's a big transition.
No.
But we got to name it and then find out how we're going to keep impacting people around us.